All right, folks. Special delivery time. Get a load of these. Mac products. What a blast from the past. Now, a good friend of mine sent these out to me all the way from Texas, Mr. Robert Campbell. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story on Mac products. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a tour around this exhaust header while I tell you the story of Mac products as I know it. Now, some of you are going to watch this and go, what the heck is Mac products? And the reason for that is, to the best of my knowledge, Mac products is no longer in business, nor have they been for the last handful of years. However, through the 80s and 90s, and maybe even before then, Mac products was just as much of a household name as BBK ever has been or will be. So that is one of the reasons that makes this a very special piece for me, is that they're very rare. They're no longer being made. And these, I can't even really guess how many miles are on them, but they are obviously used lightly. Doesn't look like they've been beat with a hammer to get into place, so that's a good sign. But one of the reasons that Mac got some knocks on it back in the day, and I'll preface this by saying it's kind of like Ford versus Dodge versus Chev, right? Everybody's got their favorite, whether you were raised in a Ford family and you hate the rest of them, or maybe you just tried a particular brand and had a really rough experience with them. That's usually how a bad name gets made for these products. So in Mac's case, one of the things they got knocked for was not having one true common mounting flange throughout the mounting surface that mounts to the cylinder head. So if you look at a set of BBK headers, they have one common mounting surface, not of this individual with the gap in between. And the knock comes from the variation that can occur from one port to the next. When you have a common mating surface that all of these pipes line up to, you have in theory less variation because all of these pipes are going to have to line up with that one common surface. So you can essentially, or some people say, one set of Mac headers to the next can have different gaps and therefore make it more difficult for you to line up the holes on your cylinder head. So for example, if you've got 1/8 of an inch in variance from this set of headers to another set, you might get these two bolts in, but these two are going to cause you all kinds of grief because the cylinder heads for the most part are, give or take 0.5%, they're all the same port placement. So the headers lining up did and can cause some people some grief. However, Mac did do this, not just because they wanted to, they did it for good reason. So Mac's claim is that their headers will line up on like 99.9% of small block Ford cylinder heads, or any, because they did make headers and exhaust for other vehicles too, but in this case, the small block Ford, they claim that they'll line up and bolt up to 99.9% of small block Ford cylinder heads without any clearance issues. So for example, GT40P heads always give people grief because of the spark plug angle. Mac claims that you'll have no problem with that. And we're actually going to test that claim because over beside my bench, I have a set of GT40Ps. I also have a set of GT43 bars. So we're going to try this header on both cylinder heads and see if it gives us any grief. Just for reference here, it's upside down, but GT40P, okay? And I'll give you a side reference here too. 4 bars. Just so you know, I'm not playing any trickery on you. I mean, to a seasoned vet, they're going to be able to realize that these spark plugs are coming out on a irregular angle to that of the 3-bar heads or the E7 heads. But let's put this exhaust header on and see how well it lines up. All right, let's do this. So I'm going to be using some OEM throwaway. These are off a set of stock headers, and chances are you wouldn't be using a bolt like this. You'd be using like a smaller head with an Allen key in it. So these very well may cause us some grief, and yes, they're going to, right? At least on this port. So whatever. Let's not knock Mac for that, because like I say, they would have included a set of bolts for these two in the box when they were brand new, I'm guessing. But for what it's worth, these will get us through the rest of them. So let's just try these out. What have we learned so far? Like I said, this bolt's going to give us grief just because we're using this crummy old OEM bolt with a washer on it. And Mac most definitely would have given you a set of smaller Allen head style bolts. Oh, look at that. Now it goes. Ha! Too funny. Just a little wiggle here and there and then you get it. So, okay, I stand corrected. OE bolts will work. Now, you can see everything else is lining up with the cylinder head threaded holes nice and squarely. Okay, so far so good. Now we get to this guy, and look at how those bolts want to line up. If you want to get this bolt in there, you got to come in on an angle, and you're going to cross thread your cylinder head if you horse around with that too much. So this is exactly the knock that I mentioned earlier on Mac headers. Not all of them, okay, but just every once in a while a set of these headers comes off the assembly line and they do not perfectly line up. And this is the argument for that one common flange, because it removes the variation from one pipe to the next. So now somebody handy and with a little bit of strength can probably maybe even throw a little heat at this and pry this guy over and get it to work. But outside of that, and especially if you're putting these on in the car, right? I've got everything in my favor here. I'm on the bench. I got lots of room to move. I'm not banging my head on the hood. And I can see what's going on here very, very clearly. Whereas if you're in the car, this is going to cause you all kinds of grief. So again, this was the knock on these. And it's really ironic that this set did this to me, but it proves the point as to why people want that common one-piece flange. Now let's take a look at the serviceability of your spark plugs with a header mounted to a GT40P head. So this isn't necessarily in reference to Mac headers, okay? This is more in reference to some of the things I've touched on in my other videos with respect to the P heads and how difficult it can be to service your spark plugs and or get a spark plug boot on the spark plugs. So you see here, I can't even get a finger between this plug and this pipe. Here, at best, you're probably running a 90-degree boot because you've got like barely any clearance, again, between the pipe and the plug. Things start opening up a little bit more here for you, but like here, there could be arguments 50-50 for whether or not you ran your plug up or down because you got potentially more clearance on the bottom side. Now, I happen to have a spark plug socket here, and I was going to show you with a standard spark plug socket just how difficult these plugs can be to service. Right? You're not on there. It's too long. Again, you're not on there. You're coming in on an angle. Lord only knows how you're getting at this one. So you can cut one of these, you know, like there are some workarounds. And then you're definitely not getting a ratchet on the end of this. You're going to be using a wrench. That's about the only one that a person can get at in a normal fashion. But even then, right, it's going to be pretty tight depending on how big the head of your ratchet is. So these are some of the things people run into when they're using these GT40P heads. I think we have solved the issue that these Mac headers will fit on there. However, it's going to be difficult to change those plugs, and not that you're doing it, you know, once a year or whatever, but every time you go to change those plugs, you're going to be stressed out because of the grief you have to go through to get past those headers and get at the plugs. Just wanted to provide you guys with a quick cross-reference here. So this is a GT40 3-bar, okay? 1, 2, 3. And you can see how much easier the serviceability is. And the other thing I'm going to cross-reference for you is you can see that I'm dealing with the exact same issue of bolt holes not lining up on this pipe. Every other one, pretty square. So this header, I mean, the ultimate verdict is this pipe needs to come over some. So prior to bolting these onto anything, a little bit of work's gonna need to take place. But there you go, quick little cross reference for you on the GT40P plug grief that people deal with. Finally, I want to draw your attention to just how beautifully welded the entrance to each and every one of these header ports is. You get every square inch of the 1 5/8 inch header pipe that you've just, well, back in the day, spent money for, versus some of the things that go on in today's day and age with exhaust headers. So I'm going to cut over to some footage of a comparison I did between BBK headers, brand new right off the shelf, and a stock OEM set, and you can see the difference between the care and the time that Mac put into their products versus BBK and or OEM. I wanted to give you a quick little look at an OE set of headers versus an aftermarket set. You can see for the most part they're pretty carboned up, but you got a pretty decent choke off point in these OE headers. And for what it's worth, they are headers. They're just not bent very nicely, right? Like they're a pretty archaic piece. And that's why everybody gets rid of these and goes to something aftermarket. You can see here, right? Like these pipe bends are nice, smooth, sweeping pipe bends. And bigger hole. Now, on the bigger hole note, I will say that BBK is really getting heavy on the weld here. Now, from what I can tell, we're definitely not going to have any leaks, but geez, there's a ton of weld in these holes. And finally, I wanted to share this with you. I'm fortunate enough to have carried this around with me and not thrown it out over all these years. I've got this brochure from Mac that came out of one of my Muscle Mustangs Fast Forwards or 5.0 mags. And this is essentially their advertising piece for everything and anything that Mac offered back in the day. And I find it rather interesting. So get myself to the start here. They went to great lengths to show you how their products weighed up against others. So in this case, they're talking about their flow path muffler and they're putting it up against the Dynamax and the Flowmaster. And the lengths they went to, like here's a decibel test at idle, 2000 RPM, 4000 RPM, like wild lengths they went to, you know, quotes from the industry, right? Which is in nowadays kind of reviews. They go to, like here, they're even claiming 16 horsepower to the rear wheels with their catback system. Pretty cool tailpipe mounting situation that they ran too. And pricing too, right? So here we've got the headers we were looking at. So they were unequal length and they were 1 5/8, $239 for those headers, brand new. And those BBKs I showed you, granted this is up in Canada and duty, shipping, whatever, but my buddy paid over $400 for those. Now, here's a neat one, right? The power chamber. I think most people remember those. That was a pretty cool H-pipe. And here, thanks EPA, you don't see those anymore. Well, or those for that matter. Everything's got cats in it now. They did a chassis master, subframe connector, strut tower brace, engine carts, windage trays. Pretty neat. They even claim their windage tray is 8 to 14 horsepower gain plus oil control. And here's like their F-150 kits. They made kits. Here's Explorer, Ranger, Mazda. They made kits for all makes and models, right? Here's Camaros, Firebirds, whatever. And here we go. The infamous underdrive pulleys, right? Everybody remembers those. Timing sets. Yeah, pretty cool stuff. So it's sad to see an outfit like this go the way of the dinosaur. It breaks my heart in all honesty. But I guess for those of us that are fortunate enough to still have some of this Mac products history, I don't know, get it while you can, I guess. So in summary, I'm super excited I got a set of these headers. I always wanted a set. I never personally owned a set back when you could buy these off the shelf. And again, Robert Campbell came through in a pinch. Thanks again, buddy, if you're watching. Really appreciate it. I think that Mac products headers were probably better made back in the day and or still to today's standards, and you can see that based on the footage I showed you, the BBK headers. It's just awful. And I've actually reached out to them to say, like, guys, what are you doing? You know, like, this is awful craftsmanship. And I actually had another issue with that set of headers where I actually had to thread one of the flange holes that mounts to the H-pipe. It never came threaded. So the QA is awful, and it's a shame to see these like household horsepower automotive names go to heck in a handbasket. So anyway, hopefully they learn from videos like this and all of us speaking with our wallets. At any rate, thanks so much for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. I hope this video helped you. If it did, please share it along to the community. That's why I do these videos. I love helping out. So thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Bye for now.